Welcome everyone to Through the Void Gate, a Warcaster podcast for new and experienced players. Deploying in 3.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 8 of Through the Void Gate. We'll be talking about Marcher Worlds post Kickstarter 2. Today, I'm joined by Justin.
Howdy.
And Spencer.
Hey.
Before we get to our main topic, let's talk a bit about news. Justin, what do you got for us?
So it hasn't been a huge week, but Privateer Press is merging the two Facebooks. A little while ago, Warcaster Neo-Mechanika Official showed up, and we already had Warcaster Neo-Mechanika General. This week they announced a move where they're going to be combining the two. I personally didn't even know that you could merge Facebook groups, but apparently you can, and they're doing it. Also, the backer kit is open, and Sneaky, what'd you get?
Awesome. So I picked up the Ultimate Empyrean package, and then for my Armory rewards, I picked up Excrator Nyx, of course. I picked up a Sentinel A-Pack Morning Star B-Pack for the Gatecrasher for my ISA Skirmish Force, the Alternate Paladin Weaver, because it looks awesome, a Mantlet, and I think that's it for the Armory. Yep, that should be 5. And then for the provisions, I picked up one of each of the objective markers for the factions, just to have a complete set, and then a couple of energy cells. Oh, and I got a Siegebreaker.
Of course.
Ooh, Siegebreaker.
Yeah.
That model's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
So Josh, what'd you get?
So I jumped in at the $160 pledge level. I think it was called Heavy Duty. I got 2 Razor Bats with the Fiddler and Co. attachment. That way I can make one of them my hero vehicle. I got 2 of the Infiltrator squads. I got the Variant Strike Raptor with its weapon kit. Corbus. I only picked up 1 Mantlet because I'm going to pick up the other couple through my local game store. And then I got 2 Marcher Worlds objectives just to keep everything nice and thematic for me.
Sounds good. So with that, what's going on in the community, Sneaky?
Awesome. So War Budgies finished up his Jericho Reach series. So definitely check out War Budgies series. It's really cool, narrative based. He's done one for the battle boxes for each of the 3 starters. And he has some really cool terrain, greatly painted models. So definitely check him out. He puts a lot of effort into his productions. As far as other podcasts go, Charge and Spike has released their Marcher World episodes. So you can check that out and see how it compares to ours right here. And then Encrypted Command released their very first episode as well. And then the last thing we've got going on is just a little update on the TTS League. So we're currently in round 4. And this is the last round of the tournament. So we're going to see, who finishes off at the top, whether it's me or Sergi. And yeah, super excited for the next league. Should be starting around January 3rd, and we're going to be using the Pendulum format for that. So it'll be, a official Warcaster tournament, and that's going to be super, super exciting.
And I think all 3 of us are playing in that, are we not?
Yeah,
you better be.
I can only usually play at nights or after 10 o'clock, but hopefully that'll work.
I mean, I'm playing for sure, so.
Yeah. So now it's time for our main topic, everybody's favorite space cowboys, the Marcher Worlds.
We're going to have Josh. He's playing Marcher Worlds. And Josh, could you tell us a little bit about your credentials and your experience with Marcher Worlds?
Sure, but I have never thought of them as space cowboys, and now I'm super upset that I didn't make that connection.
Well, I mean, you can still go buy cowboy hats to put on.
I've been watching a lot of Toy Story with my kids, so I'm definitely tempted to do that.
Dude, a Strike Raptor with a cowboy hat would be the best thing ever.
So I have 30 to 40 games with Marcher World so far. The majority of them are skirmish level. I have 2 to 4 games at full battle force. Most of my games have been against both AC and Empyreans. I only have roughly 5 games into ISA, which has me a little worried because my opponent I'm facing this round in the TTS League is playing ISA.
Okay. Well, what made you choose Marcher Worlds in the first place?
So I was flicking through the Kickstarter, just kind of looking at the aesthetics of all the different factions. And the Hunter caught my eye with their gigantic sniper rifle, and that's always been something I've loved look-wise. But then I scrolled further and saw the Strike Raptor with the railgun, and after that it just came down to I played one game on Tabletop Simulator and I was in love and never looked back.
That's really cool. What would you say are the biggest strengths and weaknesses of the faction? Let's start off with strengths.
Okay, so I think their biggest strength, which encompasses most things they're strong at, is their ability to hyper specialize. They kind of have 3 different modes that they can lean into really hard, and then a few different things sprinkled throughout that can accent that. So I think the 3 things they're best at hyper specializing in is melee, defensive capabilities, and long range. When I say they can specialize in melee, the Strike Raptor can take 2 armor-piercing POW-3 weapons with 2-inch reach, which is so good at removing models off the table. And they can either take the Precision Cortex or the Dogfighter Cortex to either give them a bit more movement, or the Precision gives them an extra POW on those Rock Crushers to make that armor-piercing even worse. The Fighter Duskwolf with 2 melee attacks and being able to get 2 attacks per melee weapon is absolutely insane. And then as far as melee squads go, in Kickstarter 2, we just got arguably the best melee squad in the game with the Ranger Infiltrators. It's only range 1, but they have a POW 5 melee weapon. They can definitely remove even jacks from the table as long as they roll well. And then when you couple that with using stuff like Kinetic Accelerator to attack everything in range of either the Duskwolf or the Strike Raptor, I've taken out 5 to 6 models at a time. And then they got a faction-only cipher called Reclamation Principle, which gives them +2 MAT, which means generally you're hitting whatever you're swinging at. On the Strike Raptor, that brings you up to a 5 MAT? No, 6 MAT.
6 base.
Yeah, 6 base, and then can be 7 with tune-up. Same for the Strike Raptor, so it becomes super easy to hit and remove stuff off the table. And then when they kill something, they can heal a Warjack that's within 5 inches of them for a point for each thing they kill. And that lasts for the whole pulse round. So not only does it add to their durability, but it gives them a massive melee punch.
Sounds like it.
And then to round it out, they got Cortical Rampager, which a 5-inch out of activation move is so huge. It gives them a deceptive threat range, especially if you're running melee. Like, I think if the Strike Raptor sits in the middle of the table in skirmish size, barring crazy terrain, they can almost reach every edge of the board with Cortical Rampager.
Sounds right. So it would be 5 inches from Cortical Rampager, 6-inch base speed, so that's 11 inches, 3 inches for their spike, so that's 14 inches, plus 2-inch reach. It sounds like they can reach just about it wherever they want to.
Yeah, and 9 of those inches are flying, so terrain isn't a massive factor.
Right. Well, and if you're doing Cortical Rampager for those first 5 inches, warrior models aren't even a factor.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that with the Cortical Rampager, it allows you to walk right through warrior models, so you can't even be jammed up by other people's squads or solos.
Yeah, that's one of those little added parts of that card that isn't going to get use every single time you play it. But when you do get use out of it, like somebody's tried to block you off of an objective or something, it's going to come in super clutch.
It came in handy the first league game I used it in. I used it to walk over the AC sniper squad to get close enough to a gate to remove stuff off of it. So it was definitely massive in that play. They also have Discordian Agitator, which allows that infiltrator squad with their POW 5 attacks to get 6 melee attacks on you. And the one thing I didn't mention is if you don't want to use the range 1 POW 5 blade, they have a range 2 POW 4 blade that does explosive damage when you hit with it. Is that the one that lets you move 3 inches afterwards?
Move, yeah. And for that one, it's the model gets to move, correct?
Yes.
It's very similar to the Raker in that the whole squad doesn't move because he gets a move. It's just that model.
If you use them right, you can hit with that and then get him out of the way so the next person can hit with their blast damage. That way you're not taking out your own models.
Well, you have to be very careful with that one if you're trying to get multiple people to stack it up, because the way blast damage works, and that unit will die to blast damage, right? It's a POW 4 blast. It will happen. But, I mean, there are shenanigans you can do with that little move.
I've definitely sacrificed half a unit before in the pursuit of victory.
Well, I mean, just think about it this way. It's a 3-inch move, correct?
Yes.
So you can move your unit up. That's roughly 9 inches. Shoot whatever you're going to do. Get another 3-inch move. So that's another, 3 inches. So we're at 12 inches. And then you can spike them because they have the same spike as all the other Marcher Worlds units and get another 6 inches. So they can move 18 inches in a turn with just one arc.
And the warder attachment lets you charge them when you activate them, so it's not even like they mess with your allocation all that much.
Or not at all if the warder gets to live, right?
Which surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, rather, he gets taken off the board first a lot of the time.
I can see it. Attachments kind of have this weird thing where, if you're going to only get a couple shots at a squad, they are the only model that somebody definitely can't bring back. So you don't have to worry about mortality. You don't have to worry about Grafter doing things. So, attachments, usually they provide some kind of powerful buff to the unit. So they do kind of have a target on their head when people are shooting at anything in your squad. Why would you?
Yeah. And they only have 1 wound, so it's not like they're super hard to remove.
Right. They aren't like Aeroliths or Rakers.
So the melee build excels at removing multiple threats off the board in 1 turn and punishes your opponent if they get too aggressive with placement. That's the biggest thing. Like if your opponent thinks they can push up on you and you have a fighter Duskwolf hanging out there, they might live to regret that move because when you're killing stuff, taking free attacks with cleave, it gets pretty out of hand.
Well, and just to be clear, too aggressive on skirmish is not even very aggressive because with cards like Cortical Rampager, where these jacks are getting extra 5-inch moves, even a Duskwolf that doesn't necessarily get the additional movement, he can still get that extra 3 inches through his spike. So, if you have a Duskwolf that's sitting on 3, you can Cortical Rampager him up 5, walk him another 6, spike him another 3. So then we're still at that 16-inch threat range if you can find flat space to get there with, right? So it is like, especially in skirmish, it is not even like they have to get that aggressive for the melee jacks to be terrifying.
Yeah, I think the only downside.
If he's sitting on 3, the fighter's at 8 speed.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. So it's actually like an 18-inch. I thank you for catching me on that, Sneaky. I completely blacked out on his.
I mean, I've been chain activating Strike Raptors so much lately that I completely forget about that sometimes myself. But I would say, like, one of the big drawbacks of the melee mode, if you will, is that if you're trying to move around and melee things to remove them from play, sometimes it's hard to stay on objectives. So you have to still be aware of your scenario presence while you do that.
Well, opponents can even bait you off of an objective if you want to do things with your melee jacks.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I did that to you one time where, I gave you the super juicy Nemesis that had been doing a lot of things, but it meant your Strike Raptor wasn't going to be participating in the scenario. So you had a choice to make. I mean, you still killed the Nemesis, but it still made you make a choice. Whereas ordinarily, that Strike Raptor could probably shoot at the Nemesis and then still go to the point.
Yeah, and I mean, Sneaky baits me with something every game, and I don't think I've ever not taken the bait.
I tried to bait you super hard with Astrius the other day, but you chose to play scenario, and I was sad.
I'm shocked because I have never seen Josh play scenario. It's always kill, kill, kill.
I think it's just because it wasn't viable. I couldn't guarantee I could remove Astrius. It wasn't so much about scenario, but I wasn't going to go up there to not kill anything. Because I had to, I only had 1 arc on me. I was going to charge to 2, but then I would add to spike to fly up there. So then and I wasn't tuned up. So I was only swinging at 4 white dice and a red dice. I wasn't going to chance it, even with Kinetic Accelerator in my hand. So, as much as I really wanted to smite Astrius for what he did to me in our prior game, I just had to go another direction.
So, out of curiosity, if you'd had one more arc or tune-up, would you have made a different call?
If I had one more arc and tune-up, oh yeah, I was going up there. No doubt about it. Just to kill Astrius feels so good.
This is a sidebar question. When you play War Machine, do you always go for caster kill if you think you've got it?
Actually, I'm super terrible at caster kill. In War Machine,
You're
I
playing
actually
caster definitely makes me feel like you're one of those, like, I'm gonna kill your caster every chance I get play.
No, I'm terrible at assassination runs, actually. My strength in War Machine is scenario, believe it or not.
Okay, I'm sorry. I brought us off the topic. What do you like for your range build?
Okay, so the range build is similar in the sense that you have a Strike Raptor leading the way, big shock. You run either the Dogfighter or Ace Cortex. Ace gives you +2 range, which in full battle force is more necessary than skirmish. Where Dogfighter, when someone targets you, lets you move 3 inches. So that can help move you out of people's range and to safety or move you into cover.
Everybody sleeps on the bomber. It makes me so sad.
I think the other options are just better. Every time I want to take bomber, there's something better out there.
Well, anymore it's the melee Strike Raptor, but
Yes. I don't think I'll be taking the melee in full battle force. I think I'm going to take this one. I typically run it with a railgun because it hits really hard, and being able to reduce your opponent's armor to try and ensure you remove that model is super good. The Cyclone Cannon, because the extra defense against ballistics is massive. If you're fully charged, you're up to a 9 defense on a Strike Raptor. And it's an anti-air gun, so you get
extra white dice
against things that are flying. And then I bring 2 battle rifles for my arm weapons because they are 16 range if you're charged and 18 range if you're charged and have the Ace Cortex. So you can really reach out and touch things with the Strike Raptor. Like, you can stay on a back or middle objective and almost have control of the board depending on what kind of terrain is in your way. And then a Scout Duskwolf ignores cover when shooting and ignores rough terrain when moving. And then I run it with a railgun and 2 battle rifles as well because it's just kind of a fast, cheap version of the Strike Raptor.
Efficient Jack that does a lot with just one arc, right? Like, you don't need a lot of your arc sitting on him for him to really have some output, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just the ability to be able to ignore cover in this game is so massive that I almost bring a Scout Duskwolf in any list just as like a toolbox thing to have.
Yeah, he's always good. I don't know, unless somebody's got just defense matrix everywhere. I don't necessarily think there is a bad place to play a Scout Duskwolf.
And then the last one is kind of like a flavor thing, what you prefer. The Ranger Fire Team have a 16-inch battle rifle when they're charged, and they also have a null grenade. So they're really good at taking arc off things, which a lot of people forget about. Lately, I've found myself taking the Ranger Heavy Team more often because they have a 12-inch range, so slightly less range. They're only a 4-speed compared to the Fire Team's 6-speed, but both squads have the spike to move 3 inches still, so it's almost negligible. And they have blast weapons, which when they're charged, they can re-roll their attack roll, which has really been coming in handy for me in a lot of situations. So I almost tend to lean towards them these days than the Fire Team.
Well, and it's having that reroll, because squads are only Rat 3. Like, it isn't like your ISA where you have a Cypher that will bring you up higher now.
Yeah.
They're always Rat 3. I don't believe there's a way to increase them at all.
No,
so
there isn't.
3 whites and a red, and having that reroll can be so critical.
Oh yeah, like as if you miss or tie, you just reroll just for the chance, right? Your
Now,
opponent might roll.
Josh, do you ever reroll when you've got the hit already?
I haven't so far. I think there's a scenario where if my opponent rolled blanks and I rolled like 1 or 2, I might get greedy and go for it.
I think if you 1 or 0 and they've rolled 0, I think it's fine to go for it. But I think if they've rolled anything on the dice, I think you just take the hit if you've got it, because the dice in the game are pretty swingy, and you just don't want to risk a hit you've already got, right? Especially because they have blast weapons, and that's half the value of a blast weapon is just getting the hit.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're probably right on that as far as odds go. And then ciphers you can take to kind of complement the long range mode is, of course, aggression theorem. More attacks is always more better. Especially, that's like a weird internet saying. More numbers, more better. I don't actually know the origin of it, but it's always stuck with me. Especially from range, because after using the melee Strike Raptor that has such an easy time removing stuff, I've found removing stuff from range, especially with the Strike Raptor, because they don't ignore cover, to be much harder. So sometimes...
Man, getting in your way. That's the shame.
So sometimes that extra attack really comes in handy, and it also comes in handy to help get body count. Like, sometimes you just need to target that one extra Weaver or Solo, or eliminate that extra, like, 2 members from a squad to score body count, and Aggression Theorem is super clutch for that.
Agreed.
Reiteration Complex, doubling the output of your squads, never a bad thing. Like, there's not a world where I take a ranged squad where I don't elect to take that. 6 blast attacks can be devastating if used properly.
I think they're pretty devastating regardless. Just the fact that blast is one of those weird instances where even when you target that thing, you are guaranteeing a damage roll. And that's pretty critical, especially when you're targeting things that are armor 3 or less. Because then, you're almost guaranteeing, well, 3 is not guaranteed. Armor 2, you're guaranteed. But almost guaranteed. But you are giving yourself a good chance to do damage. And with 6 chances at that, if you're shooting at an enemy Weaver, even in cover, you're probably going to have enough to kill that Weaver probably after 4 shots.
Yeah. And there's always the chance you get lucky and you can outperform. So it's definitely one of my favorites. Like, that on the Ranger Fire team just puts in, or the Ranger Heavy team puts in so much work. 6 attacks with rerolls. Like, there's no world where that's a bad thing.
Right. They are in contention for one of the best squads in the game, I would say.
I would agree.
Just the fact that you can take the unpredictability of Rat 3 with only 1 charge available and just have Targeter on all those attacks, I think that puts it somewhere up there as far as squads go. Now, the introduction of Empyrean squads having high intensity, they might be a little bit more accurate. I'm not sure the math on 3 and 1 and a reroll and 3 and 2 with no reroll, but I would say they're definitely up there in one of the most accurate squads.
Yeah, and I mean, pre-Empyreans, the only squad other than them that that would be better is the Annihilators, right?
Right, and I mean, Strafe is a good rule, but it is also more I would say more situational than Blast. Because with Strafe, you need, in order to get any value out of that rule, you need something within 2 inches. But with Blast, you can still get value out of the rule because even when you miss, you still get a damage. There's a lot to consider with that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And then, like, Cortical Rampager, that's going to be, like, you're going to hear that come up multiple times as we talk about these. Because when it comes to using Cortical Rampager in the ranged mode, you can take your shots and then second Cypher phase Cortical Rampager away to safety. Kind of hit and run. Where it's the opposite of using it with melee, where a lot of the times you use it first Cypher phase to get yourself closer so you can get that engagement with your melee weapons. Now it's used more in like a defensive way to get out of there.
Well, and you can even use it to clear yourself a spot off on a point, and then get on the point, right? So
definitely.
I think it has more use when you're using the ranged build, but I mean, I think both of them have. I think it can be used in all kinds of different ways. It's just such a versatile, good card. It's definitely a staple. Like if you're a Marcher Worlds player, once Cortical Rampager comes out, you are playing Cortical Rampager.
Yeah, there's not a world where you don't take Cortical Rampager.
Right.
it's not going to be the last time I say Cortical Rampager in this episode. So
we're going to have to start a Cortical Rampager jar.
Yeah. The Through the Void Gate drinking game, every time Josh says Strike Raptor or Cortical Rampager, take a shot.
People will not be able to survive.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. We do not condone drinking on that level. Like, could you imagine a drinking game where you took a shot in a like skirmish game every time I activated the Strike Raptor?
Every time the Strike Raptor killed something.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we'd never survive.
It's one of those games where I'd
sounds like we have plans for the weekend.
Okay, so sounds like we've beat up the ranged mode. We've beat up the melee build. What are you talking about when you say that March Worlds has a defensive build?
Okay, well, I do have two more things for the long range mode. Especially in full battle force, taking divination algorithm might be a thing you consider because it gives your guns +1 range and +1 POW. So it just helps a little bit with removing stuff from the table if you're worried about that. And then Revelation Matrix in full battle force, because stealth is becoming more prominent, and in full battle force it is definitely way more viable. So if you're really trying to abuse your range, I think you need Revelation Matrix in your Cypher deck for that reason.
I think that's a card you only put in your sideboard, and you pretty much only take it out for AC, because the only things that have stealth in the game that are not in AC are Sudal. Am I missing any?
No, I think you're right, actually. For some reason, I thought Empyreans had something that had stealth.
No, they might have access to it somewhere. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's a weird thing on a Jack, but I'm not sure. I don't think they do. Oh, no, the Nyx can go stealth with a maneuver.
Okay, so yeah, not that big of a deal. So I agree with you. It'd be a sideboard.
The Hunter can also be stealth if people are playing Hunter.
Yeah, I don't see a world where people play Hunters. They're just too fragile.
The problem is usually when you're... I could see a world in full battle force where Hunters are useful, because they're these little models that can sit off on their own, hide very easily, and get you gates in places you couldn't have had them before. But you're probably not sitting with arc on them. They're probably making their shot. They're probably like, ooh, I think I can kill this thing. And they're spiking it off, and then they're going to sit there either hidden or they have a high chance of dying.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So, defensive mode. Marcher Worlds has unprecedented access to Defense Matrix. Does anything else have Defense Matrix?
The Maelstrom in ISA has it.
Okay.
So all ISA Jacks currently can have access to Defense Matrix.
So Defense Matrix...
Starfire Array and Empyreans and the Razorbat also has Defense Matrix.
Well, I think he's getting to the Razorbat. He's saying that Marcher Worlds pretty much is the main problem with Defense Matrix.
Yes. But it's good to know that the Empyreans have access to it as well.
They have access to everything, Josh. I just assume they've got stealth somewhere.
That's what I also assumed. But so the Defense Matrix, which is on the Cyclone Cannon, gives you +3 defense against ballistics, which can be found on the Strike Raptor, the Razorbat, and Fiddler and Co., which is the Hero Razorbat.
What I say about Defense Matrix is that when you're playing and you have it, make sure you identify which weapons in your opponent's army have ballistic. Very important, because you don't want to end up finding out you forgot to roll those extra 3 dice, and you probably wouldn't have taken that point of damage that could have changed the whole game. So just be careful, identify what weapons do have it. I don't know if the document for Warcaster, like the cheat sheet for all the units, got updated, but there are a couple weapons that were messed up that were not listed as ballistic that are.
Well, another thing is it might help you with your strategy. Maybe you want to carve out models that don't have ballistic weapons. That way you have a higher chance of survival against everything else that stays on the table.
That's a super legit strategy.
So when I build defensively for Marcher Worlds, I take a Strike Raptor. Cyclone Cannon is a must, I think, on any Strike Raptor. I don't care if it's melee, long ranged, for defensive, it's a must. The extra 3 defense against ballistics, the anti-air gun, even if it's situational, very worth it. But another thing that Marcher Worlds has unprecedented access to is fire. They can put fire on more models in a turn than arguably anyone else in the game.
I don't think it's an argument. I think they hands down have it. Like, unless Nova cannons get really good hits, because they're a 12-inch flamer.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've seen some Empyreans throw down some fire before, so I don't want to claim too highly. But one Strike Raptor build to consider when you're building defensively is a flamethrower, because a fire spray applying fire to multiple models is always a good thing. A slug gun, because when you're thinking of defensive play, you're also thinking of positioning and scenario, and being able to slam someone off a point, or even slamming them maybe into a line for your flamethrower could be very useful.
Or even just away from you before you move. And then you can move away from further.
Yep, that too. And then the Cyclone Cannon, like I had already talked about. And then that only leaves you 2 points, which out of the 2-point shoulder weapons, the Talon Rocket Pod's the best. It's just an explosive shoulder weapon, range 12, PAL 4. I think it's your best option, honestly. And having a little extra explosives in your list isn't the worst thing. I mean, there could be some better in that slot, but for what we got right now, that's what I would go with. So when the Strike Raptor is charged, it gets +1 defense for each arc on it. So that, it starts off as a base 2 defense. It goes up to 5 if it has 3 arc on it. Typically, because you're engineers, your Strike Raptor's tuned up, so which lets it go up to 6. And then if you're getting shot with a ballistic weapon, your defense goes up to 9 against ballistics.
I could not even imagine rolling 9 white dice for defense. That must feel so nice.
And then you apply fire to things on your opponent's list, so they're rolling 1 less white dice against you. So when you're playing the defensive marchers mode, it's kind of like a numbers game. You're trying to keep yourself stacked, you're lowering your opponent's chances to hit, and you're just giving yourself the best chance of survival. Speaking of best chance of survival, I play the Neural Net Duskwolf. So the Neural Net Cortex gives the Duskwolf +1 defense for each unit within 5 inches of it, up to 3. So the Duskwolf can go from being a 3 defense light to a 6 defense light warjack, which is bonkers.
Plus tune-up.
Plus tune-up, so 7 defense? Yeah.
That's with 0 arc sitting on it. You need just a tune-up activation to get that, and it's a 6 with 0 input besides having things nearby.
Yeah.
And 5 inches in this game off of a large base, especially on skirmish. Now, full size, you might have different mileage out of this. But in skirmish, it's not hard to have at least 2 things in range.
Yeah, definitely. Even just summoning it out of a gate, it usually comes out with
a +2.
5 defense, yeah. And so I build it very similar to the Strike Raptor, where I build it with a flamethrower to, again, you're just trying to apply as much fire on the board as possible to A, deal extra damage, and B, to lower your opponent's chance to hit. Because it just slopes numbers in your favor, and that's what this build is all about.
I personally, for the Neural Net Duskwolf, I like a Blazer with double slug gun, because you can push things into strafe range and then put them on fire, and then you're working with your own strategy and making the most out of that strafe gun. Because a lot of the times people will try and position to where you don't get good strafes.
That's fair. I just like the flamethrower because it ignores cover.
That's true. I just like the slug gun because I like the people
Well, that is the next thing I have on it. I build it flamethrower, slug gun, and Talon rocket pods for the same reasons I listed on the Strike Raptor. It's literally just a mini Strike Raptor with slightly better base defense against guns that aren't ballistics. So, and then you have
It's also very arc efficient.
Yeah, that's true. That's super true. The Strike Raptor's an arc pig, where on the Neural Net Dusk Wolf, one arc and you're getting the job done.
Please tell me you put a mechanical pig nose on the front of your Strike Raptor. The best thing on the planet.
So we have a mechanical pig nose and a cowboy hat. This thing's becoming a monstrosity.
It's like Roadhog with a cowboy's.
Something straight out of Mad Max. And then we have the Razorbat and Fiddler and Co. next. Fiddler and Co. and the Razorbat also have a Cyclone Cannon for their gun that they have mounted to them all the time. So when they're charged, again, they get +3 defense against ballistics, and they're a natural 3 defense, bringing them up to a 6, which is massive because vehicles don't get cover. And then both vehicles have access to the Blazer, which, as Justin spoke to before, has strafe and the ability to apply fire on hit. So they can apply fire to multiple models very efficiently because they have a very high RAT.
Right, because that Blazer is going to be Rat 5, I believe, because it's got the turret rule and their base 4, correct?
Yes. No, I'm not sure if the Razorbat has the turret rule, but I know Fiddler does, and on Fiddler, it's Rat 6.
Right, they both have the turret rule.
Okay, so yeah, it's Rat 5 on the Razorbat and Rat 6 on Fiddler then.
Which, Rat 5, do not sleep on Rat 5, anybody out there, because Rat 5 will hit things with, just one arc. That is a lot of dice. And in this game, the more dice you roll, the crazier the outcomes become. It is it's just insane how much things can sway with different dice.
Yeah. And on the note of dice, when you're making your opponent roll less dice, it is very hard to penetrate arm 5 on the Razorbat when they're either 3 or 6 defense and they have 4 hitboxes. So they're not exactly easy to remove from the board. And they're a large model. They can clog a lane.
5 on a vehicle is super huge. I don't know if anybody's... They are basically a 4-arc Void Gate that comes out. And if you've tried to kill a 4-arc Void Gate without no weapons, you will realize how hard it is to kill a Razorbat from full to nothing.
Especially when you have fire applied, so you're not hitting as hard as you normally would. That's where that whole numbers game comes in.
Archer Worlds definitely plays a numbers game against every other faction in a very, very tangible, very, very hard to deal with way.
Oh, definitely. And the thing, that goes back to whatever mode you want to play. They can change how they do it and which way they manipulate the numbers.
This way, too. That Razorbat you were just talking about with the Blazer plus its base weapon, it's a Razorbat that can shoot 4 times with 2 different strafe weapons. So this thing can potentially get 8 attacks, and just with 2 of them will have a base Rat 5. And the 2 of them that have base Rat 5 are putting fire on everything. That means they can put as much fire out almost as reliably, not quite as reliably, as Artemis. So I wouldn't sleep on the Razorbat. The Razorbat is a scary, scary vehicle, and with Defense Matrix, it's even more survivable than... It is by far the most survivable vehicle.
Well, and they have the maneuver to stand and deliver, which bumps the Razorbat up to a 6 RAT and Fiddler to a 7, I believe.
Well, I mean, they also have their guns ready. So when an enemy model moves within 10 inches and ends their movement, they can just make an attack against them.
Yeah, so you're applying out of activation fire as well.
Right. It's pretty insane because if somebody's coming up to aggressively deal with your Razorbat, and you don't already have fire on them, you can put fire on them on their turn and definitely increase your numbers.
Yeah, and that just feels bad, getting shot out of activation.
Especially when you kill somebody solo or something, so they lose that second half of that activation.
Yep. And now, one of the things that makes Marcher Worlds extra survivable, which Empyreans have access to as well, is the new hero, Corbus.
Oh,
So, well within 5 inches of anything, Corbus can take a shot for that person, or multiple shots for that person. It's not a once per turn. As long as Corbus is alive, he can tank that shot. And Corbus is arm 4 with 3 health. So you're looking at having to roll 12 pips well on fire to remove him. And typically you're shooting at, you want to remove something else like a Strike Raptor, a Dusk Wolf, a Razorbat. So having him there taking shots for that thing so you can't kill it eats up your activation, keeping that threat alive longer.
well, and savvy players will have it to where you will have a very hard time putting an attack directly on Corvus, because him being Def 2, he isn't the most super survivable thing by himself. He's essentially a siege breaker or a marauder with just his stats. But because it doesn't require line of sight, and it doesn't matter melee or ranged for that 5 inches, just take the attack, it's very hard to just flat out kill him when you're trying to kill something that's much harder to hit and kill.
Yeah, I've had situations where someone has hit my Strike Raptor but only beat my defense by 1, and they were going to apply corrosion. So I've passed it on to Corbus because he also takes on any of the continuous effects from being hit.
Right, it's just like he was hit by the attack instead.
Yeah, he takes all effects of that hit. Slam, everything. And so he did get corroded, but my opponent didn't roll enough damage to damage Corbus, so I think he ended up living through like 4 or 5 attacks that turn.
Right. And it real feels bad for your opponent when they're trying to shoot something like, say, a Weaver in cover. So Corbus is basically, they're targeting this Weaver that's defense 4 and armor 3. And, if they hit him, they have a fair chance of killing. But then it gets shunted over to Corbus. And suddenly, Corbus basically gets a huge defense buff, right?
Yep.
So be careful when, one thing that you need to do if you're facing Marcher Worlds is be very careful of where that bubble for Corbus is. Because you do not want to shoot something and be like, well, I really need to kill this model, and find out it's in Corbus's range and find out you've wasted shots.
And another thing to think about is if you're playing against Marcher Worlds, or if you are the Marcher Worlds player, Corbus can be slammed. So if you're Marcher Worlds, you want to make sure he's in a spot where he can't be slammed more than 5 inches away from whatever you want to keep alive. And if you're the opposing player, you want to find that angle to slam Corbus at a range so he becomes ineffectual.
Oh, I try and do that so hard every time, but you do position him usually like in the crook of a building or something, so it's very, very hard.
Yeah, he's literally just there to eat shots. Like, I think I've activated him once to hit something, and that was it. Like, every time he dies the round I summon him, but he does his job and keeps the Strike Raptor alive for a little longer. A few ciphers you can take to accent the defensive mode is Interdiction Protocol can be played on a Warjack, and it gives any warrior models within 5 inches +2 defense. So that bumps your Corbus up to a 4. That bumps your Weavers up to 6. That bumps your Engineers up to a 4, which those, like, Engineers and Corbus are very hardy models, so the extra 2 defense can make a huge difference. And our squads are super squishy. Like, if they get hit, they pretty much get removed from the table, so bumping them up to 5 defense isn't exactly, like, the worst thing in the world. Like, it really helps their survivability. In the last mode, I spoke to Cortical Rampager's ability to move in a defensive fashion to get out of combat or whatever, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. More movement is always better. And then there is a case to be made for Plexus Densifier, which gives our squads +2 armor, bringing them up to 5 armor. That is really good. I've just never found a major use for it because it slows the Marcher World squads down, and their big thing is their ability to move to get onto points. I'm sure there is a world where you play it. I just haven't worked it into my list yet. But on the other hand, there's conviction countermeasure, which while the squad is holding a point, they get +1 defense, and they can reroll their defense.
While they're securing it, which means no enemy models can be on it.
Yes.
They get the 1 defense all the time, but the rerolls are only while nobody else is on it. Just to clarify.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was the +1 defense while they were securing it, and the reroll all the time.
No, they get +1 defense all the time, period. They get to reroll if they're secure.
Okay.
It would be a much worse cipher if they just got rerolls and then got the 1.
And then, so if you have interdiction like a Jack with interdiction protocol near that squad, there's suddenly a 6 defense, and they can reroll their defense. That's bonkers. Rerolling a 6 defense is crazy. So there is situations in full battle force where you may be able to make your squads very hard to remove from the board.
Marcher Worlds has a really good access to tools to be sticky. I mean, just even Weavers, they are just a Def 4 solo. So every other Weaver is Def 3, they are Def 4, which defense in itself kind of can limit how much damage somebody can get through on. Now, admittedly, it's all dice, so, if you roll all blanks, you're taking just as much damage as you would have if you had, 2 defense. But you have more access to outroll your opponent by having more dice.
Yeah.
And so, just that defense for Weaver has been super frustrating for me. Because, that sometimes when you're only rolling 4 white dice, like with my Marauder, and I need to hit that Weaver, I'm only rolling 4 white dice sometimes. So when he gets to roll the same number of dice as me, ties go to Defender. So most of the time, he's winning that.
Yeah. So their weaknesses are pretty easy to summarize. Overall weaknesses for Marcher Worlds is their ability to move Arc around. They're the only faction with no real ability to manipulate Arc in some way or another. AC has their Cortexes.
There's a couple models that don't have good access to that. I think there's solos. It's harder to argue that they are good at that, right? But all of their other models seem to have a good way to spike off Arc, even if you're not using that ability, right?
Yeah. When I say Arc manipulation, I mean AC can charge up Jacks out of activation. ISA has their Weaver that lets them charge up Jacks just by, I think it's spiking or something.
Correct.
Empyreans can just shuffle Arc around like it's nobody's business. Yep. Where you
can charge out of activation with your squads.
Yes. Now with the addition of the Warder, I can charge squads out of activation. But other than that, my only way to charge things out of activation is Arcane Synthesis.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you originally. I thought you were saying that Arc would get stuck in places.
No. So that's a major thing something you have to make sure you're doing on Marcher Worlds, and is a trap you can fall into. You need to be spiking Arc off of everything you're using except for maybe the Strike Raptor. Because if your Strike Raptor's on the board, it has 2 to 3 Arc tied up on it, plus whatever is tied up on your gate. So you usually only have 1 to 2 Arc to play with. So you can't let that get stuck on a squad or a solo, or suddenly you can be in a lot of trouble. So you really have to watch your spikes and make sure you're doing that, even just to get stuff back into your pool.
Right.
And then their only other weakness, which isn't a massive deal, but when I was running through their weaknesses, these are the only 2 things I could think of, as sad as that is the only continuous effect they have access to is fire. I don't think they necessarily need access to other continuous effects, but it's just worth noting that the only continuous effect they can apply is fire.
That's interesting. I would say that was a weakness if I didn't consider fire arguably the best continuous effect. Because the thing about corrosion is it's good at getting things killed. But when you fail to kill that thing, it's not doing anything further except for end of pulse
Yes.
round. Meanwhile, fire is definitely reducing the efficacy of that model as it goes forward throughout the game until the end of the pulse round where it could lose it or just take more damage from it.
100%. That's why I don't think it's a massive deal. It was just when I wanted to think of at least 2 weaknesses, and that's all I came up with.
Right. I would say if I was hard pressed to say weaknesses in Marcher Worlds, which I don't think they have much in the way of weaknesses, it's just that the 10-inch cipher range on their weavers is, while the weavers are really good defensive models, in my opinion, because they're just one arc for a defense 4 model, they're not great at output. Their regular weapons are not great, even though every once in a while you will get a really cool use for that slam on their melee weapon, which only slams same size bases. So sometimes it's very hard to use your weavers for furies, and I feel like one weakness that can cause is that furies will get stuck in your hand from time to time.
Yeah, you know what? You're 100% correct. More times than not, I find myself pitching Furies or just not being able to use them because of that range. Because I only typically run one Weaver in my lists, a lot of the time it gets removed off the board before I have a chance. So I think that's 50-50 between the range and keeping them on the board.
And one of my only other things I'll say is that I've seen a lot of Marcher World players, because of the interaction between like having this super mega Rambo jack that just goes around and kills everything, and being able to chain activate engineers to keep him going. In skirmish, sometimes they can have a really hard time on scenario, because when you're only activating one model and the other model, is just moving to keep up with that model and keep him going, sometimes you don't have the access. Like when you activate a Strike Raptor 3 times in one turn, that means you've only had 3 other models at most that get to move, and they're all solos, and they usually don't have the output in Marcher Worlds. The Hunter arguably has output, but he's one shot, so at best he kills one thing.
Yeah.
So you don't have access to things like the Marauder or the Siege Breaker in Marcher Worlds, where there are these solos that can kill, 2 to 4 things at a time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where, like, a lot of the time, because of that, I find myself having to make up the difference by scoring body count. Like, usually I can get 2 points in a round. I'm usually hard pressed to score the third one, but I try and get body count at least once a round, which typically isn't too hard to make up for that.
Right, and I am in no way saying that Marcher World solos are weak. I'm just saying they're different purpose than other faction solos for the most
Oh,
part.
100%. My solo output is pitiful compared to, I would say, every other faction.
We'll tell that to the grafter. Anyway,
The who?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so now that we've talked about strengths and weaknesses, how would you compare them to other factions, especially after Kickstarter 2 releases?
Okay, so this is pretty quick and easy. Kickstarter 1, they were arguably the strongest faction. I think it's just based on the fact that they were the most complete, where a lot of the other 2 factions were kind of waiting for some of their toys. And in Kickstarter 2, they got their toys, and so now I think everything is more even keel than it was. Like, I think it's become a much more situational game now, where it's not one faction is dominating the meta. It's every faction has its spot, but it just depends how things shake out. I think
they can't be top dog while Empyreans are, right?
No, exactly. I was just going to say, I think Empyreans are currently the top dogs, but it may just, like, maybe the next releases of models brings everything in line with them, So,
Well, and to be fair, I joke about Empyreans being strong. I don't think they are super out of line.
no.
I think they are above the bar a little bit, but I think that a couple little tweaks here and there would bring them right in line with everything. And honestly, Marcher Worlds, in my opinion, might be right up there with that bar on.
It is pretty 50-50. I will agree. I might give them a slight edge just because they have more access to everything, but I do think like their matches can go 50-50. I do like they are not as above the curve as Marcher Worlds was post Kickstarter 1. So that lends me to think that they aren't that bad.
Another disclaimer: a majority of our experience comes from skirmish size. A lot of these things might be a little bit different, felt differently in full size games.
Yes, that being said, starting next week, we are going to clamp down on putting a lot of work into full Battle Force. I know Sneaky and myself will be streaming a full Battle Force game over a couple nights next week. It'll be Marcher Worlds versus Empyreans, so we might have a very different opinion of Empyreans after that. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Just to say, like, about the update for Kickstarter 2, I would say that a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of the other factions got very key pivotal models they really needed. You know, ISA getting the Siege Breaker, AC getting the Raker, like just pivotal models that make a lot of things work a lot better, and have, like, you know, ISA really needed an output solo, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, whereas Marcher Worlds kind of got whipped cream on their Sunday, right? You know, like the Warder, they didn't need the Warder, but the Warder just makes the units so much more efficient to use. You know, the Strike Raptor didn't need some of the weapon options it got, but it just made it that much better. Because the Strike Raptor without those was still really good, right? None of the things they necessarily got were things that were they were like, oh well, this is the weakest part of our faction. They got things that made things that were already good a little better.
Yeah, they got augmented versus like becoming whole.
Right.
Where like
Plus,
even
I
some
think
of the
their
ciphers.
probably the biggest change compared to where they were. I think those, like, having access to Cortical Rampager is probably one of the most faction-defining changes from Kickstarter 2, in my personal.
Definitely. The only thing I would compare that to is the ciphers that AC got. AC got a massive boost from their ciphers.
Well, all of their ciphers are good. You can take their whole 4 ciphers that they got special, just throw them in your deck, and your deck is suddenly better.
Yeah, and be happy. So Kickstarter 1, Marcher Worlds was very much a long-ranged movement shenanigans faction, where I think post Kickstarter 2, they have a lot more options. Their melee mode has really come to fruition with the Cypher, Cortical Rampager, a couple of the weapon options. I really think that, like, where it was there a little bit before, now you can play, the Infiltrators. You can play a full-on melee mode with them now.
I would agree with that.
And then, as I talked about previously, like, the Razorbat's amazing. Corvus just helps the survivability of Marcher Worlds so much. So, like you said, it's whipped cream on the Sunday. It wasn't needed, but they're definitely in a very good spot post Kickstarter too.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about this throughout the cast, so I'll just have you go through it really quick. What are some of your favorite Jack loadouts? I'd say give us 2 for the Strike Raptor, 2 for the Dusk.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll start with the Duskwolf first. Talked about the Scout Duskwolf earlier. The Scout Cortex lets them ignore cover and rough terrain when moving. If they're charged, I run them with 2 battle rifles because when charged, they're 16 inches, and a railgun because that's an 18-inch gun. And you can spike to reduce the armor of the model you hit with the railgun. So it just helps them do that little extra bit of damage so they can remove some bigger targets from the board. You basically use that as your utility knife to carve things out that the Strike Raptor might not be able to. And it's really good at reaching out and touching things.
One interesting note about the armor, any kind of like armor reduction ability on anything, is it's always good to have that to do 1 damage, but it makes that model infinitely better at doing multiple damage.
Yeah.
Because if you have like a Marauder you're trying to shoot, say you have 2 POW 4 guns and they hit by the same amount, but because you can reduce that armor, you need 9 pips as opposed to 12 in order to kill that Marauder full to death.
Yeah,
and
it changes it drastically. And then the Fighter Duskwolf is another thing I take constantly. The Fighter Cortex lets you take 2 melee attacks with each of your melee weapons. So I take 2 Rippers, which are range 2, POW 4, and then when you kill something with your Ripper attack, you get to cleave, which gives you another attack. It is worth noting that you cannot gain more cleave attacks off of your extra attack you got with cleave.
However, with Kinetic Accelerator, where your attack hits everything in range, each one of those attacks with the one weapon can cause a cleave attack, which hits everything in range.
Yes.
What's your attack record with him?
So I'm not sure of mine offhand, but I think Sneaky has something obscene with his.
Yeah, it's something like 20 plus attacks he got one time.
I mean, give or take. I think
Correct.
Yeah, you're a disgusting monster.
Oh, just so everybody knows, the reason he's a disgusting monster is that was in a learning game with somebody new to the game. Awful person.
Hey, he teaches people by giving them lumps, okay? I have went to bed more than one night, very bitter. And then I have a full Battle Force Strike Raptor, which I run either the Ace Cortex or the Dogfighter, but on full Battle Force, I'm probably going to take the Ace just for the extra range on the Cyclone Cannon, because it going from 12 to 14 can be a pretty big deal. Ace gives all your guns +2 range. So I take the Cyclone Cannon, a Railgun, just for that one hard-hitting gun, even though I typically don't like spiking off of the Strike Raptor. But when you're shooting from that far away, you're probably okay.
Is there an argument for the particle accelerator or the particle cannon?
There is definitely an argument for the particle cannon. I do consider it. I just like the varied ranges of the guns. So your Cyclone Cannon under Ace is range 14, so it takes care of your closest target. Your battle rifles are range 16, so they're kind of intermediate. 18 under Ace, so they're kind of your intermediate. And then your railgun is 20, so if you really need to reach out and touch something, it's your go-to. So it gives you a bit of flexibility, where if you're running the particle cannon, both your shoulder guns, which are typically your higher output guns, are only 14-inch range.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, 14. The difference in 14 and 12 inches, it may not seem like much, but on skirmish, at least in my experience, it's massive.
Yeah, no, it is insane. And even for like full battle force, it may not seem like a big deal, but when the board is that much bigger, you really want to have as much range as possible, especially if you're trying to hold a point and not necessarily move around the board. And then last but not least is my absolute favorite Jack build. Sneaky gets 100% of the credit for everything in this build. He started out by suggesting I play a melee Strike Raptor with the Precision Cortex, which gives it +1 POW to its Rock Crushers. It runs 2 Rock Crushers, so they're normally POW 3, but with Precision they go up to POW 4, and they're armor piercing, so when you hit, you reduce your opponent's armor for that attack by 1. And then you have the Cyclone Cannon for the defense, and a Particle Cannon, because when you kill something with the Particle Cannon, everything within 2 inches of the thing you killed takes a 4 white dice damage roll, and it is not blast damage. So ISA does not get the bonus armor against it, which is worth noting.
And unlike other effects similar to this, like normal blast, where you just choose 2 models, this is everything.
Yes.
So, straight out of a gate, you can do a lot of work to things that think they're clumped up.
And so one of the most recent changes Sneaky suggested was switching the Precision Cortex for Dogfighter, which is as long as you're charged, when you get targeted, you can move 3 inches, which, to be honest, most times when I hit something with a Rock Crusher, I probably don't need that extra POW. So this gives me a little extra bit of safety. Like if someone can only get within just shooting me, after their first shot, I can move out of range or around a wall, or it even lets me move onto some points occasionally. So it just gives it a bit more versatility. So I've been using the Dogfighter Cortex.
I think the Dogfighter for this build is absolutely terrifying. Like when you're that Strike Raptor is a threat. It is the definition of like a predator in this game, right?
Yeah.
And when you have this situation where you need to kill this model, or he's going to kill probably 30 plus deployment cost worth of models before the end of the game, when you need to kill him and you target him, and suddenly he either makes it to where you can't hit him, it's harder to hit him, or he's coming right at you, and it's he's gonna get you if you don't kill him here. It makes for a very hard decision on the board for what do you do about this model.
Yeah, because if you're not sure about if you can remove him or not, you may not want to give him that 3-inch movement towards you.
And he will almost always be charged.
Oh yeah, if he's not charged, he's basically dead. But yeah, so that's my 4 prototypical builds I use. There's lots of variants you can do in there, but those are my 4 favorite off the top of my head.
I'm so sad that you didn't mention the slug gun very often, because that's just a repulsor built into an 8-inch gun, which I love repulsor. I think it's like one of the strongest abilities in the game, especially on like heavies. It's harder on smaller things, but on heavies it's really good.
Hey, I didn't mention the flamethrower on my favorites either. So, like I said, there's lots of variants.
And you know what? That's something that's good to know, is that Martial Worlds has an embarrassment of riches as far as choice, as far as jack loadouts especially. Just, I don't know if there's really much in the way of a bad option on their jacks. I would say that there's an argument for Wildflower being just bad.
There is so I will note that my choices of favorite jacks, I play a very aggressive style, so all those loadouts are very aggressive builds.
Right. Also, a note for the Fighter Duskwolf is if you are really big into armor piercing, he does have access to 1-point melee weapons with armor piercing. They're only PAL 2 as opposed to the Strike Raptor's PAL 3, but they are there. I don't know, that's one of those things like, would you take that over the Ripper? I don't know, but it is an option, because even with just that PAL 2, I believe you have a better chance of getting that multiple damage. So I think it depends a lot on your targets. Like if you're taking your Duskwolf into squads a lot of the time, the Ripper, 100% take the Ripper. But if you're going into Marauders all the time, then I think there's an argument for the Impale.
Oh, there definitely is. The fighter for me is like a solo hunter, so
I mean,
being able. Fair point.
I mean, with 4 melee attacks that can potentially spawn more melee attacks, if you ever get Kinetic Accelerator on him and get him into a few things, which one of the nastiest things about the Fighter Duskwolf is the fact that he can go in, hit whatever he's near, clear out an area, and most jacks would be done at that point, but then he can spike to Slip Displacer and get into a whole new set of targets. It makes him really terrifying. So we've beat up the jacks a little bit. What are your staple Cypher cards? I want to know this. When you see a Marcher Worlds player across the table, what cards do you can almost guarantee that they are going to bring?
Okay, so I'll start with the harmonies. Aggression Theorem's a must. As I said earlier, more attacks, more better.
I think that's a staple for the game.
Yes.
I think that you are completely off base if you are a player in this game and you do not take Aggression Theorem.
Yeah, I'm just breaking down my typical Cypher deck, and a lot of these will be auto-includes.
Aggression Theorem is that good that everybody, I think you're crazy if you don't take it.
Yeah, for exactly that reason. More attacks, more better. Higher chance of removing models. Like, sometimes you just need that extra attack to get that heavy off the board, which Aggression Theorem's great for, and it gives you a higher probability of getting body count, and it can be used for melee or range.
Right. It's such a versatile card. It's always good.
Speaking of things that are in most decks, Encrypted Command. Reactivating solos is never bad. When you can only activate a solo and something else, maybe a bunch of your solos got killed, being able to Encrypted Command that solo to get that activation can be massive. Especially if it's a hero solo that typically put in more work than other solos, being able to chain activate it is huge.
I would say the bigger one is being able to chain activate a mechanic.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially another impulse inducer.
It's almost the only thing I use Encrypted Command on is my engineers. And then Arcane Synthesis, again, it's in everyone's Cypher deck. If it's not, you should probably consider it. It keeps the Strike Raptor safe, because if I draw it in my opening hand, I'm summoning a Strike Raptor, I'm throwing 3 Arc on it, and I'm having a good time that game. And
At least you are.
and it's the only source of Ediv activation Arc manipulation other than the Warder, as I mentioned earlier. And then if you're playing melee, Reclamation Principle. Being able to heal any Jack within 5 inches when you kill something, and bringing the Fighter Duskwolf and Strike Raptor up to 6 MAT is absolutely asinine. So if you're playing melee, that's an auto include.
So, Josh, here's a question for you. Where do you think the threshold is for vehicles in your list to where you would want to run the vehicle reactivation cipher?
I'm thinking 2. So
I think you need at least 2. And
typically,
Marks of the Worlds has the most use out of this, in my opinion, because their vehicles are just so much more durable than everybody else's that, your vehicle's likely to survive, right?
yeah. In my full Battle Force game I'm playing this week, I took a Razorbat and Fiddles, and that is in my deck. This is going to be my first attempt.
Vehicle, it changes it for you.
Yes.
I think with the hero vehicle, for me, it would be that point where it's like, well, I have to consider whether I'm bringing it or not. I think 2 regular ones in the list, because you don't just lose one and then you're down to 1 for the whole list.
Yeah. But that being said, you get use out of your hero vehicle out of activation because it's also a Weaver. So it's not necessarily a must-take for you.
Well, you're talking about the AC vehicle Enigma. I personally think that the regular scythe, just spamming 2 of those, is arguably better than just one of those, than 1 and 1. But that's a different cap. Let's talk about March of World.
Well, real quick, I am of the same opinion of you, but I will say last week I got wrecked by Enigma, so my opinion has slightly changed. So overdrives. I get your shot ready. Cortical Rampagers at the top of my list. I don't care what you're playing. 5-inch out of activation move. Being able to move through warrior models. Take Cortical Rampager.
100% agree.
It extends your threat range. It allows for hit and run. You can set up for your next turn. And it helps with end of pulse round scoring, because you can move something onto an objective to contest or to score.
Not to mention it makes for some pretty disgusting melee threat ranges with your jacks.
Oh yeah, if you're playing melee, it just that's where you get the most value out of it. And then, because we've talked about how much I love chain activating the Strike Raptor, Impulse Inducer's next. Being able to reactivate a Jack that's in a key position is amazing. Jacks put in the most work in the game, so if you need that Jack to get somewhere and put in that work, you want to have an extra activation just in case. So I've recently learned that using it in your second Cypher phase probably isn't the best, because your opponent can cryo lock you, they can hit you with the Interfere to put an activation token on you. So I suggest using it your first Cypher phase to remove that action token off the Jack. That way you ensure using it.
I think it requires some situational awareness of what threats are nearby. Because there are situations where you'll put that out there, you'll take that activation token away, and they won't have a way to put an activation token on you. And
Definitely.
You get greater value out of it, right? Because then you can Cortical Rampager your first Cypher the next turn.
Yep.
And really extend that threat range that he has. But that is a good note to keep in mind, is with Impulse Inducer. Just be aware of what things can put activation tokens on you. Do you not use it as your second Cypher if there's a Scourge sitting there with an Entropy or nearby?
Yeah, which I definitely did recently and learned my lesson. Ascension Catalyst. Again, it's another threat range extender. It negates melee defense bonus against flying models. And helps get past tough terrain. So if your model, not everything ignores rough terrain when moving, so being able to give that Jack flying, so it's uninhibited or being able to fly over that building, like it has an infinite amount of uses.
I
I've
think
only
Catalyst, there's just so much good about it, and my nemesis cries when other people use this cipher.
Yes. I've only not taken it a couple times, and every time I've taken it out of my Cypher deck, I've cursed myself for it. And then, if you're playing melee, you gotta take Kinetic Accelerator. Again, more attacks, more better. Being able to attack everything in your melee range is absolutely insane. Helps you trigger cleaves, helps you get body count. Being able to armor pierce everything within your Strike Raptor's range is absolutely insane.
Well, and think about it this way: I would like everybody at home to take a large base and measure 2 inches out in every direction from it, and just realize how much real estate you threaten when you put Kinetic Accelerator on there. And realizing that, like, say, a Strike Raptor in this instance can, fly into a spot with things to where it really uses that back half of that circle. It's pretty terrifying. It's something like a 12 square inches of threat.
Mm-hmm. And then, so Geometrics, Displacement Index, which I think is another one that everyone's Cypher deck should have. Out of activation, 3-inch movement, plus being able to place your squad members. Geometrics, the first one I take, which I think is an everyone's Cypher deck, is Displacement Index. It is a threat range extender. It helps score and contest zones, and it can be used for a reposition. And you get to move one model from that squad and then place everything another 2 inches away. So its movement shenanigans is very deceptive.
Well, and with Worlds, it's even crazier because they have one of those built into every squad, right?
Yes, so you get it essentially double every time.
Yeah,
and then
real silly. So a Marcher Worlds Ranger Fire team, just for instance, can move basically 9 with their regular move, another 6 with this, and then another 6 with their spike. So you're getting something like 21 inches of movement out of one squad. You can threaten objectives and things on the other side of the board that people could have never imagined having a chance at.
Yeah, no, totally. And then Conviction Countermeasures, the second one I always take. Makes squads harder to remove from the board, helps hold objectives for scoring, and Marcher World squads are super squishy, so it is definitely a must-take as far as scenario presence goes.
Conviction Countermeasure is the +1 defense, and if you're securing a point, you get the reroll defense rolls, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yep, and we have... I feel bad saying this to an AC player, but I feel like we have pretty squishy squads, so it helps their survivability.
You're about to learn the pain of AC, so.
And then the last one's a toss-up. It depends whether you're playing ranged or melee, but I either take Reiteration Complex for more ranged attacks or Discordian Agitator for double melee attacks. Depends which way you're going, but I take one or the other. And then Furies are pretty straightforward. These are staples a lot of people bring. I take Cryolock because shutting down people's valuable pieces is great. It helps deny scoring in key situations. And sometimes it can really mess with your opponent's plans. And secondly is Velocity Projector. Being able to slam people off objectives, like Justin has talked about, is great.
Or the board.
That's number 2, is slamming people off the board. If your opponent sets that heavy 3 inches within the board edge and you hit them with that Velocity Projector, that's bye-bye heavy, which is huge value out of a Fury. And at the end of the day, you can slam someone into a wall just to get extra damage. So you can actually do quite a bit with Velocity Projector. And then my favorite, Fire, I bring Pyrokinetic Surge, which I either bring this one or the next one I'm going to talk about. I kind of interchange them depending on what I'm playing. So one of these would be a sideboard option. It applies fire for defensive help. It does extra damage both at the time of casting and end of pulse round. Because all that fire your opponent has to roll for at the end of the pulse round, which can mean end of pulse round scoring. Maybe they're not scoring, or maybe they're maybe everything's taking a little chip damage to help you get body count next turn. Fire does a lot.
Well, it definitely makes them consider, like, if you put 1 point of damage on a Weaver, and that's their model they need to score with, it definitely plays a little bit of mind games with them. Whether it's like, do I want to count on this Weaver actually scoring this, or do I need to position something else to be able to score instead of this Weaver? Like, it makes them readjust their plans, because that Weaver is no longer a reliable scoring model.
Oh, definitely. And then the other one that I find that is interchangeable with kinetic surge, pyrokinetic surge, which I find myself taking more these days, is Null Collider. So there's lots of things like the Strike Raptor that count on keeping arc on them. For example, the Sentinel can spike off arc to ignore damage. The Strike Raptor gets a bonus to defense for each arc on it. The Nemesis gets a bonus armor against range for having arc on it. And then, of course, you can use it to just remove an arc off a gate before you even roll damage. So it has a lot of applications, and I find myself taking it more times than not lately.
Those are all very good ciphers. There's like no arguing with pretty much all of those. I think they're all very, very good. So now that we've gone through pretty much all the aspects of a list, what are some list building tips in general that you would give people wanting to get into March of Worlds?
Okay, so I only have 4 quick points here. My first one is pick the thing you want to specialize in and build towards that. They, like we talked about, they can really lean into one way or another. You can build an all-comers list, a bit of everything, but I really feel like their strength is when you pick something to specialize in and really lean towards that. Second thing is we are deceptively defensive. Like, a lot of people see the Strike Raptor and they're like, oh, it's just a big tanky jack that's like gonna have high armor, but it's also really hard to hit. Movement is our friend. That's another one. Like, we have more movement shenanigans than any faction so far. It can help us get out of bad situations. It can help us get into scoring situations. It can just help you get where you need to go. So make sure you're paying attention to what you can do with your movement shenanigans. And then lastly, always bring 2 engineers. Engineers are your friend. They can take off continuous effects. They can heal your stuff. They can heal Corbus. So if Corbus eats a couple attacks and doesn't die, you can heal Corbus so he can do it again. And they can spike to remove the activation token off your jacks. So I never leave home without 2 engineers.
Engineers without doing any output are like the bread and butter of a lot of March of Worlds builds.
100%.
So much without necessarily impacting your opponent's models at all. It's really hard to overstate how important they are for March of Worlds list.
Yeah, that's why it's my final bullet point. Is like, if I leave you with any list building advice, it is never leave home without 2 engineers.
Okay, Josh, along that line, what is your skirmish build?
My typical skirmish build lately is the melee Strike Raptor with the Dogfighter Cortex, 2 Rock Crushers, the Particle Cannon, and the Cyclone Cannon, a Fighter Dusk Wolf with Double Ripper Blazer, the Scout Dusk Wolf with 2 battle rifles and a railgun, 2 engineers, a Weaver, Corbus, Fiddler and Co. So I run 2 heroes, which means after they die, you are down 1 slot, but it hasn't caused me too much grief so far. And then I typically have been bringing the Marcher Heavy Squad, the Ranger Heavy Squad, because they can really help put in work when you want something mobile with blast.
You have a quick rundown for a suggested full-size game build?
So my full-size build is the long-range Strike Raptor. I typically bring 3 Dusk Wolves, which is 1 fighter, 1 scout, and then a neural net for a little extra defense. I bring 5 squads, usually 2 fire teams, 2 2 heavy squads, 1 infiltrator, but you could drop a ranger fire team for a second infiltrator if that's the way you want to go. And then I bring 1 razorbat and fiddles, 2 engineers, 1 weaver. I think I'm pretty close there. I might be 1 off. And then my 3 heroes I bring are Artemis Fang, because she's fast and can apply fire to so many things. Corbus, because literally I never play a game without him these days. And then Wojtek Sudal, because stealth in a full battle force is super useful. And if you can get him within 10 inches of a gate to mess up your opponent's summoning economy, his value just goes off the charts in an exponential way.
I feel very bad for Jax Redblade, who is a phenomenal solo in herself, but is just Marcher Worlds is yet again at such an embarrassment of riches for hero solos that she just doesn't make the cut.
There is an argument that you can use her instead of Sudal because she is a phenomenal contesting piece. But like I've said, I play a very aggressive style where I like to remove my opponent's models off the table. And when you're removing multiple models off the table, Sudal can really help you screw up them resummoning those models on the table to give you a board advantage if you can do it properly.
I'd agree with that. I think that one interesting thing about Marcher Worlds in general is besides the Strike Raptor, they don't really have a ton of models that care to keep arc on them unless you're trying to really leverage the defense matrix on your vehicles.
Yes.
And so to that level, you have this arc that is sitting around that you can allocate to somebody like Sudal to allow him to have that ability and not really feel it as much as other factions might. And so that's a really interesting note.
And typically Sudal only gets to do it for 1 round, and then your opponent blows him off the board because he is annoying. So you do get that arc back pretty quick.
However, taking a 5 arc gate and making it to where instead of summoning 3 or 4 things out of it, they can only summon maybe 2 is pretty pivotal.
Oh yeah, completely invaluable. That's why he's my 3rd choice. If he didn't do that, it'd be Jax for sure, because she's such a phenomenal contesting piece.
Yeah, and not to mention just, in Martial Worlds, one thing I find is a lot of the times you'll end up moving your Jax multiple times, especially in skirmish. Having this access to a solo that can move 9 inches and get a gate out somewhere else is pretty pivotal when you're just moving a Jax so often.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
So, after all this, what are some final pieces of advice you'd give for any new Marcher World player?
So, outside of my tips for list building, the big one is just have fun and find what Marcher World's play style suits you. Not everyone likes to play as aggressive as me. So there are plenty, Marcher Worlds has so many options that I almost guarantee that any player can find a play style for them within Marcher Worlds. So just find something you like to play and enjoy it. Because at the end of the day, this is a fun game. Privateer Press has said they want to do lots of narrative events with it. They're not 100% focused on competitive tournament play. So make sure you're having fun with your games and don't take everything to the max competitive level you can.
Don't call me out like that, Josh.
I mean, I simultaneously called us both out because, man, do I get whiny when Sneaky slaps me around consistently.
I don't know. I get a little whiny when that Strike Raptor slaps.
I mean, we're like the same person. This is why we're friends. You're just a little older.
I think we've given people a lot to chew on with Marcher Worlds. Sneaky, Josh, either of you have any final thoughts?
I'll let Sneaky start.
No, I think Josh did a really good job covering everything.
I agree.
Well, my final thoughts are, if you don't like the evil dark cult or the new alien invaders and playing an evil regime isn't your thing, come join the Space Cowboys and let's fight the oppression. And on that note, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Welcome everyone to Through the Void Gate, a Warcaster podcast for new and experienced players, deploying in